Hello everyone, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today I have some really exciting news. Ultimate General 3 has been announced. Well, sort of. Ultimate General 3 has been announced in the sense that Game Labs, the developers of Ultimate General Gettysburg and Ultimate General Civil War, the first and second game in their Ultimate General series, Game Lab developers, or Game Lab Studios, the developer, has announced that they're looking for ideas for what Ultimate General 3 will be. They've put out a comment on their Facebook page and on their Twitter page, which I've linked in the description below, that they want fan feedback on what they think would be the best next installment in Ultimate General. So they've specifically asked, would people want to see Ultimate General Revolution, like Ultimate General American Revolution, so looking at the U.S. Versus British conflict in the American Revolution, or would users want to see Ultimate General Napoleon, for better or worse, a Napoleonic era Ultimate General game? And I have some reservations with both of those choices, but I think there would be a perfect third choice, which I wanted to discuss in this video. Now, real quick, this video that you're looking at here is footage from Ultimate General Civil War, my Confederate Let's Play. It's from the Battle of Gaines's Mill. Well, actually, at the moment, you're probably seeing me overhaul my army, but it will be followed by footage from the Battle of Gaines's Mill. This is part 12 in this Confederate Let's Play, but rather than talking about the gameplay in front of you, this video really is going to be discussing what I think would make the most sense for Ultimate General's next chapter, and some of the limitations or reservations that I have with either Ultimate General Revolutionary War or Ultimate General Napoleon. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump in. So I have a topic that I think would make a great Ultimate General game, but I'm going to hold off on telling you what my preference would be and tell you why I'm a little bit concerned about either Revolutionary War or Napoleon in terms of the next installment of Ultimate General. So with that being said, let's first take a look at Ultimate General Revolutionary War, or Ultimate General American Revolution, or War for Independence, or whatever they call it, the American Revolution against the British from 1775 to 1783. And one of my big reservations is, if you've played Ultimate General Gettysburg or you've played Ultimate General Civil War, one of the things the game really thrives on is the sense of scale, the sense of massive battles, be it, the initial opening engagements of Gettysburg as things scale up and get bigger and bigger, and then, on July 2nd, you're leading Longstreet's 20,000 men against, the Union Army defending along the Little Round Top and Cemetery Ridge line, whether you're talking about Pickett's charge and 15,000 plus Confederates charging 10 to 15,000 Union soldiers, whether you're talking about Ultimate General Civil War and the Battle of Antietam, where you have the whole battlefield at one point on display with as much as 70,000 soldiers on each side, 70,000 Union soldiers versus 30,000 Confederates, or you're talking about, battles in the Overland Campaign, or the assaults on Richmond, the assaults on Washington, which can have over 100,000 men on each side. The game thrives on scale. Beyond that, in both Ultimate General Gettysburg and Ultimate General Civil War, the smallest unit that you command is a brigade. And because of that, I think Ultimate General Revolutionary War or American Revolution, whatever we're going to call it, would suffer. And the reason it would suffer is because the American Revolution, the battles were small. They were really small. For example, the largest battle of the war was the Battle of Monmouth. That had about 30,000 total soldiers engaged. It was the largest single-day battle of the American Revolution. When you compare that with battles of Antietam, with over 100,000 combatants engaged, the Battle of Gettysburg with about 150,000 plus combatants engaged, you get a really clear picture of just the vast difference. And Monmouth was the largest. A lot of the more famous battles, outside of Brandywine, which is about the same size, outside of the Battle of Brandywine, a lot of the battles were dramatically smaller. The British would have 10,000, the Revolutionaries would have 6,000. Battles of 2,000, I know it was more of a raid, but the Battle of Trenton, I believe it was 2,000 and 2,000 roughly. These were small engagements, and when you look at Ultimate General, it thrives in epic sort of engagements. And they could fix that a little bit. The smallest unit in the game is a brigade, which if you're going by Ultimate General Civil War brigade sizes, that's anywhere but, the Battle of Monmouth is maybe 10 brigades total on each, like total, not just each side, but total. So it's hard to convey that scale. Now, maybe you increase the sprite ratio or decrease the sprite ratio so that each little simulated guy is representing fewer and fewer people, and maybe instead of the smallest unit being a brigade, you make it a regiment, so now you've got, more units to throw around on the field. There are things they can do, but I think they'd struggle to really capture the epic scale of the Revolutionary War. Additionally, I think it would be more difficult because the qualitative difference between the soldiers is so dramatic. Stand-up, knockdown fights between the Americans and the British in the Revolution very rarely went the American way. And it's not so much like in the American Civil War where the Union lost a lot, but it wasn't so much a qualitative difference as it was often a leadership difference. The Revolutionary War, I'm not sold that it makes a great epic war game for this type of game. I think it would make perhaps an interesting game in a Scourge of War environment where it's a more tactical experience with a more role-play type feel where you represent one commander and overcoming certain obstacles. I'm not sold that the American Revolution is terribly interesting from a gameplay perspective. The flip side of that is the Napoleonic battles or games. If you were to make a Ultimate General Napoleon, the scale is there and then some. You've got Napoleonic battles like the Battle of Eylau, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, or the Battle of Freeland, which are basically the size of Gettysburg. You've got the battles of Jena and Austerlitz, which are more like the Battle of Antietam in terms of the scale, the number of men engaged. So manpower is not an issue there. Communicating the size and the epicness and the grandeur isn't there. It might be difficult to communicate a narrative. Like even with the Civil War, there's sort of a clear picture of start to end in terms of moving through the campaigns. And the wars of the coalition between Napoleon and the rest of Europe are not quite as clear. It's smashing victory after smashing victory for Napoleon, victory in war after victory in war, and yet more and more wars continue. Telling that story is a little bit more challenging. Additionally, I'm not convinced Ultimate General's set up well to do Napoleonics. They'd have to add in square formations for dealing with cavalry. They'd have to really make the cavalry substantially more powerful. And a lot of Napoleonic games really struggle with the AI being able to manage square formations in an effective way. I'm thinking of breakaway games, Waterloo, Napoleon's Last Battle, where your troops would form into square fine enough if the enemy cavalry was threatening, and then they would just sit there and take fire all day until they'd rout. There's a lot more complexity, I think, and it fundamentally changes the nature of warfare and the relationship between infantry, cavalry, and artillery in a way that I don't know if the game is set up to do. I think they could do either the Revolutionary War or Napoleonics. I think they could do Napoleonics more easily than Revolutionary War, but I think it would take a lot of effort and a lot of time to fundamentally recraft the game. I think either of those games would benefit from a more focused approach than Ultimate General Civil War ultimately was, in that you would probably want to make it more like Ultimate General Gettysburg, where you're really focusing on a specific battle or a specific campaign, and you remove yourself from the whole war picture. You remove yourself from the army building. But to me, that's kind of what makes Ultimate General Civil War really interesting, in a way that Ultimate General Gettysburg was awesome, but not quite as appealing to me as Ultimate General Civil War was. So I think they'd struggle with that new mix of cavalry, that new mix of professionalism, like the Revolutionary War having this sort of professionalism versus sort of militia or scrappy young young army concept. Napoleonic side, this whole new tactical envelope that they'd really have to master in a way that they haven't. And I also think that the Civil War was interesting because it takes you at a time when technology is changing, when building up a core force is appealing, because as you go through the war, technology progresses rather dramatically. in a way that it doesn't in the American Revolutionary War. The British are using the Brown Bess in the American Revolution the whole length of the war. They're still using that weapon during the Napoleonic Wars. The Americans are using whatever, but there's no, you're not going from 1842 smoothbores to rifled muskets to Henry repeaters. So if you're going to try and tackle the army building aspect, it's more like, all right, I got to recruit more men. They're all using the same guns. Artillery, there's a little bit more variety, but not really from a technological standpoint. And I think a topic or a genre to me that would be the most interesting for them to tackle would be a game that you would title Ultimate General: The Rise of Prussia, or Ultimate General: The Unification of Germany, or The Wars of Unification, or something to that effect. It would be a game that would look at multiple conflicts, so you'd have that parallel with Napoleon, but it would be progressively more complex. You would be fighting during a period where technology and tactics are changing rapidly. You would be in an era where the role of cavalry would be very similar to what it was in the American Civil War. Cavalry charges still occurred, but they were ineffectual. And what you would basically do is you would look at sort of your principal country would be Prussia, and you would look at the wars of German unification. So you'd either start with the first war of, is it Schleswig-Holstein between Germany and Denmark, or maybe you start a little bit later. So that war is in the 1840s. Maybe you start in the 1850s with the second Schleswig-Holstein war. I'm sorry, the 1860s. And then you follow that up with the Prussian-Austrian War, and then you move it into the Franco-Prussian War. So you have three separate wars, progressively growing in scale and complexity over a relatively short time frame. When technology is changing, tactics is changing, artillery is becoming more and more impressive and powerful, and it's an interesting and diverse political landscape. If you're playing on the Prussian side, and I think it makes a lot more sense from the Prussian side than it does from the others, because it's hard to say, like, you're going to build a core allied army, but wait a minute, are you Denmark now? Are you Austria now? Are you France now? But if you're building that core army, if the idea is to carry your army through all the campaigns, you can really start building that cadre of forces in the Schleswig-Holstein War, in which you kind of start with smaller armies, it's smaller conflict, smaller numbers involved, interesting diversity of tactics, storming of forts, things like that. You move to the Austrian-Prussian War, and now you've gotten bigger scale conflict, bigger engagements, progressively important to Prussia. And then you have it in the culminating war of the era, the Franco-Prussian War, 1870. And the Germans, I believe, use the needle gun throughout, so the small arms weapons on their end don't change dramatically, but their adversaries certainly do. During the, especially, I don't know about the French army in 1870, but I know the Denmark army was still using sort of rifled muskets, breech loaders in the Schleswig-Holstein War. But I think you have this natural progression of smallish, still good-sized conflict for this type of game, growing conflict, growing complexity, to epic scale beyond anything seen on Ultimate General Civil War. And it covers the same time frame. So from a tactical perspective, linear combat, the growing power of artillery, cavalry's around but growing and increasingly less effectual in the same way that it represents during the Civil War. And to me, that seems like a natural transition from the Civil War to a little bit of pre-Civil War and a little bit of post-Civil War. Or a little bit of mid-Civil War to a little bit of post-Civil War from a technology and doctrine perspective. So I think that makes a lot more sense. I mean, Napoleonics will probably sell the best of any of those options. The American Revolution isn't going to sell well in Europe. I don't know where they get the majority of their sales, but Napoleonics are huge in Europe and relatively, at least well-known in the U.S. The American Revolution would presumably sell better in the U.S., but on the flip side, I don't think it's going to sell anything overseas, and I just don't think it's as appealing of a game. The way this game is designed, don't get me wrong, the American Revolution doesn't have enough coverage as a game genre. But Ultimate General would, I think, fundamentally have to change the game that it is and the game that it has become, the direction the game has developed, the direction that the developers have taken this game, I don't think translates well back to the Revolutionary War. So I think you either have to have Napoleon, and that's really just based on scale, Napoleon with a fundamental restructuring of the way the game works, or more interestingly and more appealingly, the Franco-Prussian War, or the wars of Prussian unification, starting with the war against Denmark. And I think you also have in that game, you have similar sort of bloodlettings in terms of casualties. You know, technologies has outstripped tactics, and that's true for sure in the wars of Prussia. That's less true in the wars of Napoleon. Casualties were horrendous in the Napoleonic campaigns. But engagement ranges are much narrower. Melee combat is much more important. Cavalry is very important. To me, you get a more Ultimate General feel with just the absolute slaughter. This game even struggles in the Civil War because of the way it just becomes a bloodbath every time. And the American Civil War was a bloodbath, don't get me wrong, but you don't see 90,000 people being casualties in any American Civil War battle, and I've seen that happen multiple times in Ultimate General Civil War. Same for Ultimate General Gettysburg. But the way that the tactics, the way that the weapons worked in the Franco-Prussian War by that time, it was certainly possible. I mean, not necessarily what happened, but technologically speaking, it was just an absolute bloodletting. I mean, you had, what did you have here? You had over 140,000 Prussian or German casualties in the Franco-Prussian War, more than 750,000 French. Now, granted, more than half of those were captured or interned, but still, these were just massive engagements that had huge losses on both sides. If you look at the Battle of Sedan, sort of the early culminating moment of the Franco-Prussian War, 200,000 Germans, 130,000 French, and you have about 20,000 killed or wounded on the French side, about 10,000 on the Prussian side. So again, similar to what you would expect in a lot of Civil War battles in terms of casualties, larger in scale. So to me, and that's also a topic that really hasn't been covered. You really don't see games tackle the Franco-Prussian Wars, or the wars of Prussian or German unification. So I think it would be an interesting topic. I think it would be interesting in that technology is rapidly evolving between those three conflicts: the Second Schleswig-Holstein into the Austrian-Prussian War and into the Franco-Prussian War. And again, you have this ability to build a core force that you carry through the conflicts and the battles, build up experience, build up your prestige, take increasing roles of responsibility. To me, it makes a lot of sense, and it seems like a natural progression. So that's what I'd like to see. But with that being said, I know, I've put the link in the description. Feel free to obviously drop over to their page. Let them know what you're thinking. Also, in the description or in the comments below, let me know what you're thinking. Am I off the mark on my thoughts? Are my criticisms or concerns with the Revolutionary War wrong? Is my sort of feeling that it would be a much greater level of effort to New Napoleonic, and it would fundamentally need to change the way that the battles are fought to accurately model a Napoleonic conflict? Are those wrong? Do you think the wars of German unification would make for a good Ultimate General series the way that things are going? And let me know your thoughts, because I think it's exciting. I think it's awesome that the developers are clearly trying to decide what Ultimate General 3 will look like. And I'm just hoping for something a little bit different, something we haven't seen a ton of before. And I think they have really the opportunity to deliver on a gem. And frankly, I think the series has established itself enough. I'm hoping it's established itself enough by this point that they don't just have to release the most popular conflict, which would be the Napoleonic Wars, in order for it to sell well. I like to hope that there's a large enough fan base around now that would support it and would drive sort of a positive momentum one way or the other, regardless of what conflict they release. I don't think the Rev War would do well, but outside of that. But yeah, let me know your guys' thoughts below. Anyway, guys, that's going to do it for this video. So until next time, this is the Historical Gamer saying thank you for watching, and I'm out.